Okay, in this year, the Babylonians recorded a great blackness that swallowed the stars, a dark god from below that they called Tiamat, a sky dragon with 7 heads that the Egyptians and later Greeks called Typhon. All this is mixed up in the traditions. Appeared in this year of 1915 BC. So it says that Typhon's arms, it's not Typhon though, guys, but you got to remember, many times they confused him in ancient times because they were actually considered as siblings. Typhon's arms stretched 100 leagues in either direction, and instead of hands, he had serpent's heads. His head touched the stars, and his vast wings darkened the sun while flaming rocks hit the ground. The legend of Typhon, Nemesis X object, actually provides more evidence of memories of Phoenix mixed in with Tiamat. In the myth of Typhon, the monster in space has a sister also connected to the darkening of the sun, another monster named Delphine, which preserves the root in Phoenix, and Delphine is D-E-L and then Fiend. But in Hesiod's Theogony, preserves this event as occurring a short time after Zeus, Nimrod, conquered the Titans, the sons of Iapetos, and the Anakim. Hesiod wrote that Typhon appeared in the sky with strange heads, which is an old designation for comets with black tails. The dragon heads gave off flames and vibrated the earth with noises as mountains trembled. Thunderbolts struck the earth as waters boiled until a fiery hurricane was born. The disaster concluded with a powerful lightning bolt flashing between earth and Tiamat, which gave rise to the innumerable legends of a hero god who slew a sky monster. Remember, in ancient Babylon, the patron god of Babylon was Marduk. What did Marduk use? He used the labrys, which is the spear, the lightning spear, and he slew Tiamat. It's one of the most popular stories out of ancient Babylon. So one of my favorite researchers on Atlantis, Tom O'Connell, who wrote Joining the Dots, said he notes that the important fact that nothing in the Atlantis narrative of Plato is remarkable. Everything mentioned were things that actually existed in the Greek world and in Greek history and were known in Plato's day in the 4th century BC. There is nothing fantastic about the Atlantis story. There is no fantastic technologies. There's nothing mentioned in the text that was any different than the world that Plato lived in right then and there. All the fantasy about Atlantis was introduced over 1,000 years later, and especially during the Golden Dawn period of the late 1800s all the way up to World War II, when people were inventing all these fantasy Atlantis narratives, and you hear it all. You got all this stuff that was added to the Atlantis narrative is not found in Plato. None of that's found in Plato. The majority of people who hear Atlantis already have things attached to it. They think all this psychic stuff was going on. They think all these energy weapons, and they think about all these flying vessels and ships, and none of that is mentioned in the Atlantis narratives. None of it. It was all created later by creative license, by newer and newer mystic writers who were adding more details that were never in the original writings. And you don't have to go by what Jaason says. Jaason produced the data set showing you all the ancient authors who said it was a day count system. Now, I didn't make this up. I'm just telling you what I found in the historical record. So here we have, under the 360-day year, the Mayan long count was 400 years. 400, one Bacton was 144,000 days, but 144,000 days is 400 times 360. Until the year 713. We've already talked about this. Got some good videos on 713 BC, when the sun retrograded 10 degrees, moved backwards 10 degrees, vaporized 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Ever since then, we've had a 365.24 day calendar. All the calendars in the world changed from this event. I have a video that shows you. It's amazing the data we have on this. All the civilizations in the world at the same time change their calendars. And when you adopt the new system, the Mayan day count system changes. It changes because a Bacton is no longer 400 years. It's now 394.2 years. It's still 144,000 days, but the number of years actually changes. And when you take that into consideration, this is why in 2009, when I wrote a book called Anunnaki Homeworld, and I informed my publisher, hey, you might want to check this out because you got all these popular authors trying to doomsay, talking about what's going to happen in 2012. My book, Anunnaki Homeworld, right here, I'm showing you the math. Nothing's going to happen in 2012. 2012 is not the end of the Mayan long count. They made a critical mistake. Here's how you correct it. The sky is absolutely full of biological materials. And in my own Archaics presentations, I have shown in numerous data showing you guys that biological materials have fallen from the sky. Even blood has fallen from the sky, called red rain, until it was discovered by scientists that had blood corpuscles in it. It was analyzed and many of the red dust and red mud fallout that fell in 1902 and 1903 was also scientifically analyzed. It seems like facts are omitted from most of the presentations that I've been reviewing lately, and it's all this fantasy that's injected, but the fantasy is presented as professional as possible, so you're left with more, by the end of the presentation, you're left with more questions than answers. Well, we're going to get to that here because by the time we get done with this video, you will no longer believe the Reichsstadt structure in Africa has anything to do with Atlantis at all, at all. You're listening to a man who believes 100% that Plato was describing something real. And the Atlantis narrative is a description of something real. Ships from other worlds that have been seen by millions of the inhabitants of this earth, exploring night after night. There's that prose again. There may be civilizations in the lands of the stars. Fort speculates that alien superconstructions travel planet to planet, and sometimes they are wrecked. Derelicts, rubbish, old cargoes from interplanetary wrecks, things cast out into what is called space by convulsions of other planets, things from the times of the Alexanders, Caesars, artifacts left behind by visitors from other worlds. The Giza structures, which are pre-flood, antediluvian world, these are constructions of the Sethite dynasty of the 10 kings. They're the ones that built the pyramids. Later Egypt, post-cataclysm, built their own pyramids. And one of those pyramids was the Pyramid of Unas, where the majority of the pyramid texts are found. These are wall texts called the pyramid texts. But later Egyptians, when they were going through these pyramid texts, they didn't quite understand what these concepts, and they made them simple and cartoonish, but they're actually very advanced, talking about a wonderful structure that was found in the desert that had been delivered from God. Yeah, it was a holy place. It was the gate to the kingdom of Seeker, which is a gate to the dead in the underworld. The establishment has lied to us, saying that the people who built those places, there's over 40 of them, but they only focus on one. They say they buried it. But most people don't have the understanding of the logistics required to bury an entire infrastructure. It's almost as much work as building the entire complex. It's ridiculous. No one buried Göbekli Tepe or the 39 other Tepe sites. No one buried Catalhuyuk or the 60 other Huyuk sites. They were buried by liquefaction. They were buried by cataclysm. I'm telling you now, a technologically advanced civilization did build the Great Pyramid, and they did use machining, and they did use synthetic stone and geopolymers, and they did do it with a small minority of men and a lot of machines. The Great Pyramid may even be a very technologically advanced form of 3D printing. Not Anunnaki gods, not aliens, not ancient aliens. humans built the Great Pyramid. Listen, I tell you guys all the time that you've got to go into the specialist material. This is something that Graham Hancock ignores, but the specialist academic peer-reviewed material that is published on all these type of things. Listen, academia has absolutely dismissed all these theories. The academia knows the Reichach structure is a salt dome. As a matter of fact, it has concentric rings, which aren't really perfect, but because at different times subsurface pressure ballooned up and formed salt domes at different times of different sizes. But don't take my word for it. Let's go through the data set, because this has long been called the Eye of the Sahara. Remember in the book of Genesis, seasons, the rainbow did not appear until the Great Flood. And in the Archaics research, I show the Great Flood was what? The collapse of the vapor canopy. Is he describing the flood of 2239 BC of Noah? I doubt it. I believe he's describing something far worse. 3895 BC, Adam and Eve reset. Genesis 1. But I could be wrong. He could be this whole scenario he's describing could be 5239 BC, year one of the Anuna calendar. I don't know. I'm even open to the fact that he could be describing 2239 BC, which means that the whole entire history of the 1656 years of the pre-flood world did not happen anywhere near the Near East. It would have happened in the southern hemisphere. And this is what we get in the Sumerian records. Remember, the Sumerian records are very clear. Where did the Anuna come from? Where did the Sumerians claim that these amazing people came by ship? Where did they come from? They came by way of Dilmun. Where is that? You're coming straight out by ship from the southern hemisphere to use Bahrain as a staging area before they entered the Tigris-Euphrates and then colonized Egypt, colonized India, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Larik, colonized Canaan, colonized Turkey, colonized all of the Tigris-Euphrates. It makes sense. It means the pre-flood world would have been in the southern hemisphere. So this is what we have with the Sumerian text. We have a story told of a Indo-Iranian infrastructure that baffled the Sumerians, who considered themselves and called themselves with great pride the black-headed people. They had smooth skin. It was amazing to them that the Anuna could grow facial hair. To them, it was a sign of divinity. In Egypt, they called them Shimsu Hor, and they thought it was so incredible that they could grow facial hair that pharaohs later, after the Anuna were gone, pharaohs then had their subjects carve for them wooden beards. So that, because the wooden beard became a status to the people of one who has been chosen to rule. 2239 BC is the Great Flood. In one phoenix cycle later is 552 years. Creates the Ogygian Deluge. The flood of Ogyges. There's more historical records in existence concerning the flood of Ogyges than any other disaster in human history. It's amazing. Yeah, that's really interesting that Behemoth of the Bible and Leviathan of the Bible are theorized by many scholars in the 1800s as basically being the two sky dragons that periodically visit and destroy the world. I've showed that in other presentations. I thought it was pretty interesting. So here is St. George. So you've heard of the famous story of St. George and the dragon. So St. George vanquishing the dragon was originally just the sun breaking through, obstructing clouds. That's right. Phoenix brings all this dust, these dust clouds all the time. The next great man was Charles Piazzi Smith, Astronomer Royal for Scotland, who in 1880 went to Egypt to verify, to see if John Taylor was telling the truth about the Great Pyramid. But we're jumping the gun. John Taylor is not to be ignored. He didn't just write a book about the Great Pyramid. He also wrote a book called The Battle of the Standards. He was an expert on standards of measurement. And he, too, verified that whoever built the Great Pyramid understood the foot and that it was divisible by 12 parts, called the inch. Yeah, this is technolithic, meaning it has an engineering function, meaning it is so absolutely perfect and sophisticated with laser smooth tolerances that this was built by machines, not by guys wearing sandals with copper chisels. These four sides on the Great Pyramid are 51 degrees. The longitude of perihelion, measuring the base diagonals of the Great Pyramid. This is what Christopher Dunn's research is amazing. He's gone through here and he's found the artificial materials. He's gone in here and he's found the evidence of the planing, the hypersonic boring, all the techniques that a advanced civilization would employ using machines. Now, for those who have any doubt, the amount of absolutely scientifically precise rectilinear measurements that add up to periods of 138 years, all referencing the year 2040 Anno Domini, is absolutely amazing in the Great Pyramid. What you're looking at would take me literally 12 hours on video to go through these measurements and show you. Every single box you see is an actual date in world history where something very significant happened to the human family. Every one of these box deals, every one of these boxed dates are separated only by the actual measurements in the Great Pyramid. We're not talking about having 40 or 50 chronometrical alignments that show the rectilinear measurements of the Great Pyramid identifying major events in world history. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds that I find. How come I haven't found thousands? Because I haven't had the time, but they're there. But it's not just any events. It's amazing what we find. Again, this is the amount of research is amazing. For those of you who have your Chronicons, maybe you'd like me to do this, but maybe I can provide a PDF of just like pages like this in my handwriting so you can see for yourself just by looking at the box, just by looking at the boxed dates, because everything between those boxes is all actual rectilinear measurements in the Great Pyramid. I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. Remember, pillar was the ancient name for pyramid. Greeks invented the word pyramid. Prior to that, pyramids were called pillars because they held up the heavens. And pillars were covered in divine knowledges, just like the Great Pyramid used to be. But it was a mathematical knowledge. So it's impossible not to have a relationship with something that makes up the very fabric of our own being. We are inextricable from that which we refer to as God. The book of Revelation is a Greek text. It was written for a Greek-speaking world in the days of Jesus, who spoke Greek, said all of his parables in Greek, taught the people in Greek, and the text of the first century are all written in Greek. It was for a Greek, it was the international language of the time, despite the fact that Greece had fell to Rome. Latin was still only being used in the Senate and in Italy. It had not become the universal tongue yet. So when you break the book of Revelation down into its Greek components using a Greek lexicon, it's a very different picture than what you get with the Judeo-Christian interpretation of the first and second horsemen. You get something totally different. And I'm going to reveal exactly what that difference is right now. Well, here in a minute when I start this presentation. So I just wanted to preface all this with letting you know that yes, my channel has taken off. Yes, a lot of people have become very familiar with the Archaics material, but I've put my life into it. This is all I do. I don't have much of a life outside this. I read. I'm reading books. When I'm not online, I'm reading books, putting things together. This is what I do. This is the pledge I made. I am very comfortable spiritually with who I am today. I am the prodigal son. I know this. You are too. I've told you guys, the prodigal son is the key parable to understand who you are and where you're going. We have 3 million megafauna carcasses that are in the permafrost that can be warmed up and fed to sled dogs today. There are still people in Siberia who routinely dig out the ice and eat giant tree sloths, bison, wild pig, huge woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros. This has been going on for centuries. In Russia, it's never stopped. It's going on today. There are people right now with mammoth meat in their meat lockers in Siberia right now. They're not going to ignore this massive food supply. All that was flash frozen. For hundreds of years, the ivory that appeared in Asia, in Europe, in China didn't come from Africa. It came from Siberia. They've been mining that ivory from those mammoth fields for centuries now. It's exactly what's happening here. This is the alchemy of the spirit. This whole experience. There is nothing in the construct by which the alchemist can find to transmute base lead into gold. It doesn't exist. It was never the message. It was never the message. But that message in the medieval texts on alchemy up to the Renaissance, the real message was the construct itself. Itself is the tool for the spiritual alchemy. It's the construct that's turning us into these badass immortals. Because when you're able to demonstrate the spiritual qualities and powers, rights, privileges, and immunities that you can grant for yourself while you're in this restrictive medium, can you imagine what you're going to be qualified and able to do when all the restrictions are removed? Can you imagine who you're going to be when all this dungeon programming and this negative default programmed holography is completely removed from the field and you are able to reach your true potential? So in the majority, almost all, matter of fact, all histories that are writing about time periods before are post-reset narratives. This is the value that Archaix has brought to the community. And I know, I mean, I'm not talking about the critics, because we have a lot of critics paying attention now, trying to figure out what a lot of the latest controversies are. They don't have a clue. And I don't blame them. They don't have time to review 640 presentations. I get it. But the amount of data that is in the Archaix presentations that shows all of our timekeeping systems, all of our calendars, legends, traditions, lore, faiths, belief systems, fables, everything was recorded long after the events they depict. Uniformitarianism is built on a whole mountain of theories, and each theory requires things to be true that have never been proven true. But in Archaics, we deal with the facts, chronological facts that can be demonstrated in data sets, for which I've provided, and I'm not done providing them. And in the Archaics model, 5239 BC is where we begin. And after that, we have the unfolding of many, many chronological systems. The entire historical record fits within the Archaics model. But prior to 5239 BC, nothing can be dated with accuracy. 190 years is a very long period of time. I'm going to demonstrate that because I'm going to be giving you guys perspective. This is what is missing from the education community. What I mean is it's real easy to talk about vitrified fortresses and all, and it's good. It's easy to talk about mud floods and phoenix resets, and we can talk about civilizations that rise and fall, diluvial cataclysms. We can talk about Hesiod's theogony and how it talks about a different series of cataclysms than, let's say, the writings of Ovid's Metamorphosis. But if no one's providing you perspective, it's just a bunch of stories. This is author Stephen Jones, biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, wrote the book. He wrote a book called Secrets of God, using the Assyrian eponyms, the Book of Jubilees, the entire Old Testament, and the Book of Jasher. Those are his only 4 sources. He put together a history of the world. It is very compelling. The reason I found it so fascinating is for 2 reasons. One, Stephen Jones in The Secrets of Time specifically isolates a 414-year period that he calls a cursed Earth system, and then he proceeds to show that all the major events in world history are all 414 years apart from each other. And he's right, because 414 is 138 times 3. He didn't know about the Phoenix phenomenon. He had isolated the 414-year period, and it is relevant. But if he'd have done a little bit more digging, he would have found the Phoenix phenomenon. He just didn't. What's interesting, though, is his year 1 is year 1 in the Archaics Chronology for totally different reasons. 3895 BC, right there on the left. This is year 1, 3895 BC. To biblical chronologist Stephen Jones. He doesn't even know that by many other species of analysis, I have determined the exact same thing, completely independent of his research. The immortal knows that power comes from source. Only from within can that power be tapped into. The power of the immortal comes from within. But the tools of the immortal are in the construct. I tell you guys all the time, information is not in the brain. Information is in the field. You need to realize when you're a broadcaster and when you're a receiver, when you are a doer and when you are just living a very boring victimhood reactive life. The immortal is never alone. The immortal inspires fear, but feels none. Is that you? Understanding that he is wrapped in the very armor of the Godhead himself. I'm going to repeat that. The immortal inside the construct inspires fear, but fear feels none. And this is simply because it's a byproduct of a relationship. It's simply because the immortal knows that he or she is protected by the divine. And anyone who truly believes that fears nothing. Zechariah Sitchin showed that in the Genesis creation account, according to the Yabashah, which is a Talmudic or rabbinical text, in the Yabashah account that breaks down and interprets the book of Genesis, it literally says that Genesis 1, where it says where the waters were gathered in one place, it literally says dried out land masses, meaning that the Adam and Eve destruction was literally a reset. It was a recreation of a pre-existing world that had been totally flooded out and destroyed. This is a flood way before the Gihon flood. This is a flood way before Noah's flood, and even way before the Ogygian Deluge. You have to understand the Mayan calendar is attached to Mayan prophecy. There are 2 major prophecies attached to the Mayan calendar. Well, actually, there's 3 of them. In the Mayan traditions, at the end of the 13th Bacton, which happens in the 13th region of the world, The ancient world was subdivided in regions 1 through 12. The Americas are the 13th region. The Maya believed they lived above 13 underworlds. They believed they lived under 13 heavens. And at the end of the 13th age, a god named Balan Yakti would appear, and he would initiate the reign of the 7 gods. This is Mayan prophecy. Also, at the end of this, at the end of the 13 cycles, would be the invasion of demons. Also, what would happen is the absolute collapse of time and how to reckon time. This is exactly what we find in the Book of Revelation in the trumpet judgments. Ishak Bintov's research in Stalking the Wild Pendulum and A Brief Tour of Higher Consciousness is something everyone needs to read. And he provides all kinds of personal experiments that you can do to prove that information isn't in your head. It's in the field, and you can pull it and you can draw it to yourself. Ishak Bintov's work is deep, guys. But if you are regarding reality as something that is hostile to you, the construct will obey the immortal within, and hostile situations will begin popping up in your life. If you believe that there is opposition to anything that you want to accomplish in life, the construct will make sure that opposition appears so that you are telling the truth. If you believe that something is going to come to pass in your life very quickly, then the construct can move those variables around so fast that it will even surprise you when it happens. Absolutely fast. And the reason is because the construct is not restricted by the dictates of the continuum of what we call space-time. What you're looking at here is 7,344 years of history, but 7,344 is divisible perfectly 3 times by the number 2448, the Exodus number. 7,344 divided by 3 is 2448, the Exodus number. Why is that relevant? This means that the sloping angle in inches represents years of world history. As I've shown in multiple different pyramid videos, I've shown you guys where the pyramid is a calendar in stone by many different species of analysis. So, it just goes on and on and on. I got to show you this. Even in other dimensions of arithmetic, even in totally different dimensions of arithmetic, even when we look at things in pi and phi, we still get calendrical correlates and phoenix numbers all throughout the Great Pyramid. It would literally take me 12, 13, 14 hours to get through all this data. It's mind-blowing. But what I wanted to do was get the concept out there to you so that when you're looking at other Archaix presentations, you'll better understand what we're dealing with here is a technologically advanced civilization that knew, oh shit, our end is coming. And they only knew that because they'd already lived that before. Remember, a couple years ago, I didn't know why, but I was telling you guys that I don't know why, but it seems like the ancients were absolutely fixated and they were fanatic about calendars and making sure that they were detail specific. Why? Why would you encode so much chronometrical material into your traditions, into your structures, even creating architectural frames of reference that didn't really even have utility or any type of value at the time? But later on, they could be used as frames of reference to understand methods of measurement, like the pyramid inch. So on this loop, I'm trying to go as slow as possible so you wrap your mind around what I'm proposing. I've already given so much evidence for this. I just never really did it in one presentation. But what I'm proposing is that what if we were to look at world events a little bit differently today? We already know things don't make sense. We know the whole Biden administration deal was a puppet deal. We already know that 3 different multi-trillion-dollar stimulus packages, we know that money didn't go where they said it went. And this is what started the renovation of ancient Earth after a total systemic collapse of a pre-existing civilization. It's amazing. It's right here. So according to the author, the Finnish Kalevala, which I want to do a video in the future on, I still got to finish reading it, but the Finnish Kalevala or Kalevala has the same idea of these winds being from a giant bird. Also, the account of the creation given in the Rig Veda also agrees with this situation, this imagery. But we'll see to that. We'll see to that. And I put a note on the side, phoenix egg. The reason is because the alchemical text, in the alchemical text, we have a lot of references that are pretty interesting about the cosmic egg and all that. And if the ancient concept shows that a great sky dragon came and destroyed all this stuff and deposited oceans, and then turned around, followed by a great cosmic bird that appeared and then gave birth to a whole new world, then that means all these cosmological texts and all these alchemical texts that keep showing this egg, it means the egg is the symbol of a new world being born. But we can't just go by structure and phonetics. Typhon is Phoenix, but for totally different reasons. We'll get to that in a minute. This Heliopolitan cosmology is very, very interesting because the ancient Egyptians had a pantheon, the Ogdoad, and they had the Aeneid. Yeah, it was 34 years ago when I was 17. And this ride was all possible because I was never alone. In all that journey, despite thinking I was alone, despite thinking I'd have been abandoned, despite the times I literally told God things that I wouldn't even tell my enemies today. Oh yeah, I've cussed God out. Oh, I've given him the business. Yeah, I've talked real stupid to God a few times. And in the past, it's been so weird how my life just really smoothed out and straightened out after I just unleashed emotionally on God. Just totally called him a piece of shit and everything. And went on and said, and you know what? I've done it. Wait till you see when you see the data itself and how it's presented and the recommended reading, the additional PDFs, all the additional stuff. The additional stuff is just for you. It's just for you to say, man, I've got this information from Archaix. It's for you to be able to learn it if you want. But it's the actual courses. I'm thinking they're in between 7 and 12 pages each. But my pages are packed full of information. We have to reduce things to their lowest common denominator so we can get to the fundamentals. And that's what Archaics Academy is about. Archaics Academy is about getting that education that no one can ever deceive you again. Anybody trying to foist some false paradigm, some conjectural, absolute BS, you're going to have the data that completely exposes it. That's what Archaics Academy is about. It is about empowerment of the researcher, and every single download is packed with recommended reading and PDFs, actual PDFs that support the material of the lesson. Every course is also has at the bottom a bullet point summary of the salient points that are being presented in that course. Because when you're able to demonstrate the spiritual qualities and powers, rights, privileges, and immunities that that you can grant for yourself while you're in this restrictive medium, can you imagine what you're going to be qualified and able to do when all the restrictions are removed? Can you imagine who you're going to be when all this dungeon programming and this negative default programmed holography is completely removed from the field and you are able to reach your true potential? We're immortal. That day is coming. But before that day comes, we are not alone. But we're made to feel that we are. Just like that little child who's holding on to his dad's hand and he's made to walk, and dad lets him go. The child doesn't instantly turn around and fall down. The child tries to take 2 or 3 steps first before falling down. And then when he falls down, before he decides to cry, he looks up at dad. We're that little child. Because I have a very unique history, and that history is data mining in prison for decades. I didn't have anything else to do but collect data, collect information. I wasn't even trying to really put it all together. It just naturally came together. That's how I found the Phoenix phenomenon. That's how I found Nemesis X. That's how I found cross-calendrical parallels and all these amazing palindromic patterns in history. When you, just like Franz Boas said in the 1890s, if you record enough facts, the answers will fall to you like ripe fruit. It just happens. With the acquisition of more and more data, you're able to disseminate fact from fiction. This is the nature of the construct. It's never going to make you out to be a liar. But once we internalize, once we slow down, once we process a situation and realize that we are moored to source and all power comes from within, we realize you can't even make that assessment without understanding that we are not alone. We are moored to something greater. And if I'm moored to something greater, and I'm connected to something far more powerful than I am, then by virtue of that connection, I'm able to draw from myself more than I contain. And if there is any little bit that I can draw forth that does not belong to me, but comes from somewhere else, then there is no restriction as to how much I can draw. The restriction lies in completely with me. When you process fully that we are not alone, you will understand that problem solving is not an external phenomenon. 2239 BC is the date of the Great Flood. 1687 BC, I've got 5 videos in a series called the Ogygian Deluge that describe what happened to our world just on that one date, 1687 BC. This one date, 1687 BC, the Ogygian Flood, literally answers about 95% of all the mysteries of the ancient world. All the Technolithic, post-Technolithic, and Heliolithic architecture, megalithic blocks, buried cities and civilizations that everybody's showing pictures of and theorizing about and doing measurements of all over Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and all these published books. 95% of all the ancient structures in the world derive from this destruction. What do you do when you have this amazing amount of data? Are you going to ignore it, or are you going to come to the table and see where your information can be compatible with it? What do you do when something so profound as the Phoenix phenomenon actually completely overturns every theory of Nephilim and giants that has ever been published? What do you do when you find out that the Phoenix phenomenon creates volcanism? You can imagine the destruction that happened that year. So Phoenix would have appeared in the middle of May. It would have been the first to cause destruction. And then when people were trying to recuperate, because this was a big one, it wasn't Phoenix phenomenon, it's Phoenix cycle. So when people were trying to recover, then 6 months later, about 5.5 months later, November 1st, November 2nd, all of a sudden, the Nemesis X object appears and just wrecks shop, which was to take a horse and run it off a high cliff. All around the Mediterranean, the Aegean world, those high cliffs, all is because the land got broken up. And they have high cliffs. They have high cliffs all over the Mediterranean islands, especially the Greek, the Aegean islands. And that was a sacrifice to Poseidon because he was the god of horses. And if you're on a ship observing one of these ceremonies, a sacrificed horse, which is run at high speed and galloped off a cliff, it becomes a flying horse. So this is where the origin of the Pegasus came from, sacrificing horses to the god of the sea. The Ogygian flood and the total destruction of the ancient world, far worse than the great flood of Noah, isn't a topic that you've ever heard about on any channel, on any venue, anybody's published books until Archaix. Why? Why has something that, it wasn't hard to find the data. I've got 5 Ogygian flood videos and another 60 videos that talk about it and add more and more details. Ogygian flood is so well recorded. Why has no one ever drawn attention to this event? The sun turned black. The moon turned red. The ground shook, earthquake, stars fell from the sky. The oceans became tumultuous, and people ran to the caves and the mountains to survive. Old Nick is a name for the devil in folk speech. Was originally Old English Nickor, a water demon. What? Old Nick is the description of a water demon in Old England, in Old English. Further proof of this is right here. But in the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, on the waves slew the Nickers by night. Sea dragons and Nickers. Nick was a devil, a water devil. This goes back to Grimm, Teutonic myth, the year 1604. This dude reached way back and pulled this data out there. Old Nick. So the church took Old Nick and turned him into Old Saint Nicholas. Said, to this cow, the king and queen offer flowers and fruits. In the temple of Edfu, a structure of the Ptolemies, 360 local forms of Hathor are said to have been enumerated, and among these, 7 were especially prominent. Again, this is the same thing in the ancient Near East. 360 degrees of the celestial sphere represented 360 days of the year. Of those 360 days of the year, 7 of them, representing the 7 kings and the 7 most prominent days, are identical. The system we find in ancient Egypt attached to the goddess is the same one we find in Sumer and Akkad. So let's move on. That for 150 years before Jesus came, there was a millennial Messiah craze going on at that time period as Buddhism was expanding from the East and coming into Antioch and it was everywhere. But this craze that was going on was about the phoenix. Every time a new calendar, the Greek Ptolemaic, the Syrian Seleucid calendar, every time a new dynasty started in northern Egypt that was of Macedonian descent, some author said that the phoenix appeared. Why? Because they wanted to give that dynasty legitimacy. I've showed on my channel, we have 5 or 6 phoenix appearances when they didn't even appear. Well, what did happen was the Coptic calendar was started, the Seleucid calendar was started, ancient Aramaean calendar was started, Byzantine calendar was started. Phoenix never appeared at any of those times, but the writers after that introduced Phoenix, just like writers introduced the Phoenix, the sun darkening episode in Earthquake when Jesus died. The ancient climate of the North Polar regions, according to these 95 specimens found by this guy in the permafrost, here it is. Same climate as South Italy. What is he saying? He's saying the North Pole was Mediterranean climate. That's what he's saying. Again, vapor canopy. Again, why were hundreds of millions of life forms in the north all facing south? They faced south because that's where the destruction was coming. But before that tsunami could reach them, the collapse of the vapor canopy instantly froze the northern regions. His name wasn't really Merodach. His name was Baladan the First. But by using the word Merodach as his shim, as his name, he bought into an entire belief system we'll be getting into here. I'm going to make you understand what the full implications of this curse were. Let's move on. So the apocalyptic dragon is cast down, announcing woe in Revelation 12:12. It is the symbol of worldly pride and tumultuous rebellion, of confusion and anarchy. Here are the verses in the Bible talking about how this dragon of chaos is the origin of our oceans today. These are the verses that talk about, thou rulest the pride of the sea. This is in the book of Psalms. We are now in a position to understand the full mystical significance of the otherwise enigmatic statement with which the book of Revelation closes, that this dark image of sin and disorder, which has marred the earth from its very foundation, will have no place in the renovated world. In the new heaven and the new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness, there will be no more sea. We're talking about a future period in the world where there will be no more oceans, because the presence of oceans in our world today are evidence of a fallen world destroyed by cataclysm. This isn't the original biosphere. This is the biosphere after the heavens collapsed. And in one day, a coastal city, Tiwanaku, a coastal city with a bay, Titicaca, was thrust 14,000 feet above sea level. How do we know? Because Poznansky and many other archaeologists have already found the fossilized coastlines. You don't build quays, wharfs, and docking systems at 14,000 feet. In addition to that, Lake Titicaca used to be the bay Titicaca. What is it today? It's a freshwater lake for 12,000 feet altitude. But what's in it? It's got sharks. What is a shark doing at 12,000 foot altitude in a freshwater lake? What are seahorses doing? And crabs and all kinds of saline life forms from the sea that have now adapted to freshwater. That's what Lake Titicaca has. It has former sea creatures now living in a freshwater lake that have adapted to the difference in pressure, the difference in temperature and altitude. So this is how we know. It happened in a day. With the cultists of the Bennu, you guys have heard me talk about the Bennu bird, representation of the phoenix. With the cultists of the Bennu at Heliopolis is connected the story of the phoenix. Herodotus tells us that he was informed by the inhabitants of Heliopolis that a bird, which, if it resembled the pictures, was gold-colored and red, and like an eagle in shape and size, came from Arabia to their city once every 500 years, and buried the corpse of his father in Myrrh in the sanctuary of the sun god. So that's there's really not there's really not a lot to comment here. Heliopolis is the city of the sun. It's where the mansion of the Phoenix was, an ancient city called Anu, back when it was a Sumerian outpost. Later, it had become under a nationalist population in Egypt. Its name was changed from Anu to Heliopolis, or On. The Greeks called it Heliopolis. Later became Memphis. This Herodotus is basically identifying for us that the Phoenix only appeared every 5 centuries. 500 is a round number. By the time of Herodotus in 450 BC, it was just unknown what the periodicity of the Phoenix was. But that the Phoenix identified the concept of burial, of death, and was connected to the sun god is very interesting here, which leads us into this next passage. From later accounts, we learn that the Phoenix, on reaching the age of 500 years, prepared a funeral pile of spices and burned himself upon it. Then he recreated himself and carried the remains of his old body to Heliopolis. Tacitus says, in the consulship of Paulus Fabius and Lucius Vitellius, for example, in the year 34 AD, after a lapse of centuries, the Phoenix appeared in Egypt. They invaded Egypt twice. They attacked the Greeks and totally destroyed the Hittites. Every bit of this is in the historical record. Who these people are has been so mysterious to academia that they labeled them what they were, the Sea Peoples Federation, because they came from all these areas. They're all named that are island chains and all the stuff in the Mediterranean towards Sardinia, Spain, Gadesh, around Gibraltar. They came from the Atlantic. At that time, the Azores were much bigger. So, let's see. Got people working outside, so you might hear some heavy equipment. Oh, by the way, and as soon as the Sea Peoples Federation War was over with and all that, we have 2 new cultures in the Mediterranean that suddenly appeared who were a part of the Sea Peoples Federation, and they built their own civilizations, and they became mighty, unopposed. They are the Philistines and the Phoenicians. Both of them just suddenly appeared right after the Sea Peoples Federation invasions. And the Hittite Empire was no more. They were completely taken out. So there are many academic studies that show that around 1177 to 1130 BC, a great collapse of the civilization occurred and the Great Mediterranean Dark Age began. It was earthquakes, a sky darkening, and disasters. These are the reports of the time, guys. They're the reports of the time. So let me show you this chart before I do my summary. All I have left is my summary, but I need to show you chart. Because my summary is going to put every bit of this data into perspective. All right, so Archaix. So apparently, I need to go present, share my screen. All right. Okay, so I have, just so you'll understand, this is, before I show my new chart, I'm going to show these 2 old ones. This is the Archaics Chronology. This is the historical period, 5239 BC, including the corrected Anunnaki calendars. Remember, ancient aliens people, Zechariah Sitchin, they messed it up bad. Now, the ass or the donkey was the sacred symbol of this god, and a peculiarly formed animal. His symbol is found on the monuments. Now, in poisonous serpents, Also, the Egyptians saw this destructive deity, and they brought the crocodile and the hippopotamus into association with him. The third of the 5 additional days added to the year belonged to Set. This was to the Egyptians an unlucky day. Remember, the Egyptians identified the 5 new days added to the year because of a cataclysm. One of those 5 new days was Typhon. Why would you take the bringer of darkness, a dragon, a red dragon from antiquity, something that embodies the concept of collapse, of evil, of destruction? Why would you name one of the additional 5 days of the year, from 360 days on the ancient calendar to the suddenly appearing extra 5 days a year? Why would you name one Phoenix, Typhon, Set, unless those 5 days had something to do with a cataclysm brought on by the sky dragon? It's the only explanation. And that's what we found in my book, Anunnaki Homeworld, and in Chronicon, and in my video presentations. I've showed you what happened in 713 BC when the Egyptians were forced to add 5 days, like every other culture in the world at the exact same time, added 5 days to their calendar. It wasn't something that people independently discovered. It was all done uniformly around the world at the same time. And it was done because of what appeared in the sky. So the Egyptians called those 5 days the unlucky days. On a papyrus, he is called the Almighty Destroyer and Blighter. This is Set, Typhon, Phoenix. Sometime in the ancient past, when we were technologically advanced in a pre-cataclysm world, a civilization that could build the Great Pyramid Complex, which we can't do today. Sometime in the ancient past, there was a female who brought a lot of value to the race. And she was very well remembered and with great fondness. Maybe she was a medical officer like Zechariah Sitchin and pretty much alludes. Sitchin in the Earth Chronicles is that the Sumerian goddess worship goes back to an actual real individual among the Anunnaki who was female and who was a scientist. That's Zechariah Sitchin's conclusion, and I have to agree with him. Now, 1254, a lot of good history in Chronicon about that. 1314 was the giant black spear that was seen over Europe. Different historians call it the Black Comet. It was the period of history called the 7 comets over Europe, and the 7th comet was a black comet. Other people described it as a black spear, similar to the spear that was seen over Nuremberg that we've seen in woodcuts in art from 1561. You guys have seen that. I've showed it on my channel multiple times. 1314, the Nemesis X object was documented and seen in that year. 732 years later, we get our date. You guys know it, 2046. 2046, return of Nemesis X, 2046, the end of the Mayan long count. You know this date. I've got probably 30 videos about this date. 60 years to finish the 972-year periodicity of the Nemesis X object gives us this epic date. You guys know it. It is the 6,000th year, Annus Mundi. It is the 6,000th year, Anno Mundi, since 3895 BC, Adam and Eve reset. No, the world is not 6,000 years old. I'm not promoting that. This is a calendrical system that has been known since antiquity. This is 6,000 years after the Adam and Eve reset, which was a destruction of a previous society, a previous world, a previous civilization. Plato wrote that Atlantis, quote, was swallowed up by the sea and vanished. Plato also said that the island of Atlantis completely disappeared. So Plato said that Atlantis was submerged beneath the sea beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. And there's a lot of evidence that those islands have sunk. We now know in 1902, the entire ocean floor around Martinique and Saint Frere sank 3,400 feet. 130 years after that, the Maya were at their peak when suddenly something wiped out Veracruz State, Oaxaca, Central America, and even scholars were at a loss. They don't understand. It's almost as if 80% of the Mayan population vanished. I'm not telling you that. That's what's in the scholarly reports. That's what's in the books that have been published by academia. 130 years after that, Mayan holdouts. How is a new god even being born? And to be born, it's very interesting, the backstory that's given to Horus. The sun suddenly appears. How did the Egyptians not know what the sun was? How did the Egyptians not have a solar deity? How? I'm going to explain it to you. My Archaix veterans already know where I'm going. But after the cataclysm, when Zep-Tepi collapsed, when Zep-Tepi and the dynasty of 10 kings were gone, suddenly a new god appears in the sky. You can't miss him. He's the sun. But where has the sun been during the entire time of Zep-Tepi? Where? Because it was unknown and unseen. And when it first appeared after the great flood of the Bible that ended the first time, the dynasty of the 10 kings and the Anunnaki 7 kings, the great flood that happened in 2239 BC, ending the 1,656 years of the antediluvian world, which started with a phoenix cataclysm that created a new heavens and a new earth in the year 3895 BC. Humidity is required for snow. Snow is required to build the ice caps up, but they're 2 miles high. How did they get that way? This is why uniformitarian dating requires you to believe in ice ages when they're not true. When a vapor canopy exists, there are no ice caps. When a vapor canopy collapses, instantly there are snow caps that are formed, and within a period of months they become packed. And the whole mesosphere of moisture, the vapor canopy, empties. It becomes very, very wet. It causes flooding toward the center of the world, but at the extremities, it all freezes. This is why we have 2.2 million woolly rhinoceroses, woolly mammoths, mastodons, great giant megafauna bears, giant armadillos, giant turtles, and everything right there in Siberia, in northern Alaska, in northern Canada, all along the permafrost zone. This is why the first intermediate period is the Great Flood. It wiped Egypt out. It took centuries to come back from that. And as soon as the intermediate period is over and Egyptian civilization begins waking up, all of a sudden a new god is added to their pantheon. The sun, Horus, son of the sun, wasn't venerated by the earlier Egyptian gods. This isn't Jaason telling you this. I've showed you the old books that said this. The Egyptians introduced the sun as a deity at the same time the Sumerians did, and it was at the end of their culture. It's because the vapor canopy collapsed. The collapse of the vapor canopy caused what you know of as the Great Flood. So there's been some interesting comments about, hey man, Randall Carlson would probably be a good debate for you on the dating of the Great Flood. According to the early Greeks, the reign of Kronos was a golden age of peace and prosperity when people never grew old. It was the age of the Titans. All right. So this is pretty much paralleled in the genealogies of Genesis and Jasher. This is what we have. People born after the flood live for at the most 400 years, with human longevity declining rapidly afterward. If you notice in like the book of Genesis and in the book of Jasher, you will see that all these patriarchs that started dying off, like Serug, Peleg, Shem died. In Egyptian reliefs, Nut bends over, her hands touching the earth and her feet touching the earth, and she's perfectly arched. She is the vault of the sky. The goddess fell. When the goddess fell, the world was destroyed. The sun was born. Her water broke. And in reverence to the goddess after the cataclysm, while she was no longer in power, and now the sun had taken over the sky and was moving up. It's a whole different system. Those who still venerated the goddess did so by covering her artifacts, her reliquaries, her treasures, her idols, all her sigils. They did so by taking a black veil and covering it. Where have we seen the black veil covering a holy object before? Think about it, guys. One of the largest religions in the world has a holy object covered in a black tarp, a black veil, and their religious symbol is the moon and a star. So what do cultures do when they're close together, overpopulated, and cannot communicate? When they're on a vast plain that's got all kinds of places to go, well, they move around and they find homes. And what does the archaeological record show? It shows that everywhere in the 3rd millennium to 2nd millennium BC, cultures moved rapidly all over the world. Massive migrations are documented by anthropologists all over the world. They built a pyramid, and then they built their city around it. This is the story we get in the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees and the rabbinical writings, that there was a period of time when one of the last titans, Noah himself, bestowed all his knowledge and wisdom on Brahma, which has come to us as Abram. But it's Brahma and Saraswati are the original names, and they were Vedic. Only later, when the Jews wrote the Old Testament based off Babylonian records, they changed it to Abram and Sarai, or Sarah. Charles Fort documents that in 1902, hundreds of millions of tons of red dust in particulate, hundreds of billions of tons of red mud fell all over the world, all the continents, all over ships, all over the sea. It probably fell in a whole bunch of places that was undocumented as well. And he cites all these scientific reports from around the world where this stuff was studied and it was realized it had organic material. I know the Hopi believe that in the return of a black sun. I know there's a theory about a second sun being black in our own system, and Antichthon, it's absolutely on the opposite side of the earth, so we never can see it. There's a lot of various theories. The one I hold to the most is Nemesis theory. And in Nemesis theory, we had two suns at one time in the ancient past, and one sun, Nemesis, collapsed. And that collapse was visited with an explosion. That explosion sent Phoenix, Electra, Luna, our moon, Nemesis X. Those four bodies catapulted them to the nearest star, which was Sol, which became our day star. And Nemesis theory is very interesting. It's not something I came up with, but I have added my own details to it as my research has shown. But I don't know what black sun you're talking about. There are many traditions about a dark sun out there. I know Andy Lloyd has written some pretty good books called Dark Star. You might want to check those out, but that's really just another variant of Nemesis theory. This is a part of the historical record. It's not just in Genesis. There are many traditions that talk about this scenario. This is cargo cult phenomenon. This is a technologically advanced race of people. They're just humans. In this case, they were Caucasian, and they were bearded, and they were very tall. They were very impressive. And when they landed their ships in the Tigris-Euphrates basin and came across the black-headed people, which is what the Sumerians prided themselves, who couldn't grow facial hair, who had black eyes and black straight hair and a very short stature, they were impressed, not just because of the physical stature of these newcomers, but because they came on ships they had never seen before. And they came with technology. They came with armor and weapons, and these things were unknown. And this is the story that unfolds in the book of Enoch and in the book of Jasher. Anybody reading the pre-flood accounts of the book of Jasher for the year 456 through 490 in the book of Jasher, this is 3439 BC all the way down to 33, about the Mayan long count time, 3113 BC. When you read those accounts in Jasher, you find out that the newcomers showed up and they taught men cosmetics, contraceptives, herb lore, gardening, canal works, how to make armory, forge weapons, metallurgy, gemstones, lapidary type stuff, numismatics. They brought the knowledge of civilization. These weren't gods. Okay, so Shiva, okay, that's sutras, yeah. Because I know in the Quran they're called surahs, and there's a lot of things Jesus said that came straight out of Buddhist texts. And I've taken a lot of flack from people who don't want to hear that in the 1st century AD, when Christianity was supposed to have been basically born from a Jesus who had 12 disciples that began to spread all these things, and Paul, and people just don't want to hear that academia, they're not wrong. Buddhism was rife all throughout Israel in the 1st century. The Emperor Osaka in India had sent out 30,000 missionaries, Buddhist missionaries, and over 150-year period, they had spread it everywhere. And Antioch, which is said to be the birthplace of Christianity, this is exactly what you'll find in a systemic reset. The survivors still had their rings, jewelry, pearl necklaces. They died within 50 years after the Great Flood. But the jewelers and the lapidaries and all the tradesmen that are still making things are not making them with the quality that existed prior to the cataclysm. This is exactly what Woolley and other archaeologists found. Things became more and more inferior with time. I find that very fascinating. Woolley wrote, I quoted him. He says, "It is astonishing to find that at this early period, the Sumerians were acquainted with and commonly employed not only the column, but the arch, the vault, and the dome, architectural forms which were not to find their way into the Western world for thousands of years." And this is implicit because in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh himself found that Utnapishtim was indeed far away, because he did not dwell among men anymore. He was still depressed. Even after 300 years after the cataclysm, this Titan was still in sorrow that the world was gone. The world he knew never came back. It was technologically advanced, and he missed it, and all his friends, all his family, and he never recovered from that. Noah became a drunk after the cataclysm. Now, what I'm also going to tell you is the story may not even be true, and it may just epitomize a phenomena that a whole generation just gave up because they lost everything and they weren't willing to rebuild. They knew in their lifetime they'd never be able to see even a modicum of the amenities that they had before. So the story typifies a scenario, whether it's real or not. The very first product being made after the Great Flood Cataclysm reset is alcohol. So I'll drink to that. All right. Forgive me, Don. I do think this is going to be a long video. All right. And if you guys can't hang with me tonight, that's fine. You can come back and watch it. Watch the rest of it this weekend. But I'm going to get this out because this is 390 years. We got a lot to cover, and it's fascinating. So, yeah, using scripture to interpret scripture, we find out that when Ham saw his father's nakedness, it's merely a Hebrew euphemism for Ham, Kim, from 1561. You guys have seen that. I've showed it on my channel multiple times. 1314, the Nemesis X object was documented and seen in that year. 732 years later, we get our date. You guys know it, 2046. 2046, return of Nemesis X, 2046, the end of the Mayan long count. You know this date. I've got probably 30 videos about this date. 60 years to finish the 972-year periodicity of the Nemesis X object gives us this epic date. You guys know it. It is the 6,000th year Annus Mundi. It is the 6,000th year Anno Mundi since 3895 BC, Adam and Eve reset. No, the world is not 6,000 years old. I'm not promoting that. This is a calendrical system that has been known since antiquity. This is 6,000 years after the Adam and Eve reset, which was a destruction of a previous society, a previous world, a previous civilization. This becoming animated came forth as Satan, the serpent, formed. It's very interesting that in the Gnostic records, he is also called Ophion. Ophion is Phoenix. So look at this. I need to draw your attention to something right here. In the Gnostic speculations of the Ophites, the men of the snake, Demiurgus, the creator of the material world. Now remember, Demiurgus is the enemy. He is a false creator. He is not the true creator. Yaldabaoth is the Demiurge. So we have here the creator of the material world, not the spiritual world. Demiurgus was filled with rage and envy at the superiority of man to himself. I have explained this many times, guys. We're talking about artificial intelligence X. Remember, the construct is just that. It is a construct. We live in a predator versus prey ecosphere, which is not an original creation. This is a copy by an artificial AI generator that has created a world that is very believable, but it's not real. It's not real. The Demiurge created this artificial reality to copy a true reality, but introduce things that give it away, such as its proclivity for violence. Anyway, Plato wrote that the submerged region of Atlantis, get this, in Plato's day, the submerged region of Atlantis was still a hazard to shipping in his time. And they had to watch out because the bottom of the ships would hit submarine architecture and would get caught in shoals of mud and all kinds of flotsam and jetsam from when Atlantis was above the ocean. One thing that's very interesting is there isn't a single person alive today that was alive 138 years ago. That number is real interesting. It's real interesting. 138 is not just the Phoenix phenomenon number, but it seems to be a cap. It's intrinsically connected to the fine structure constant as well. Here it is 138 years later. It is 1,656 months after the destruction. Phoenix appears again, and it's seen in the sky. So the only thing really interesting about this is that I'm only mentioning it because the Chinese have a tradition, but their tradition is 34 years off of this. Now, hear me out. Hear me out. The Chinese say that the sun darkened. And because it was so unexpected, the emperor, who didn't like the fact that the mandate of heaven had changed and he had not been warned, he executed the sky watchers. And it became a tradition ever after for emperors to execute any astronomers who could not accurately predict the darkening of the sun. So, I find this interesting because the Chinese date for the Great Flood is 30 years off. 31 years off. The Chinese date for the Great Flood. It's off. So I find it really interesting that the sun darkening of the Chinese sun darkening is 34 years off from this date right here. And I haven't done it because it does not qualify as evidence to me. It's only interesting. So remember, guys, my own My own standard is far in excess of even what academia holds for themselves. I do not go by plus or minus a single year in my research. I don't do it. Everything is exact. All my sources, people have bought those books and looked themselves, and those are the dates that are published. Those are the ones I provide. This right here is very interesting to me, and I'm probably right. It's probably the Chinese. This is probably it, but I just can't use it as evidence because all my data sets are designed to be sealed tight. I want no room for argument. So anyway, it's just interesting. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you takes on a much deeper meaning when you realize you aren't alone in this experience. There is someone behind your eyes. Think about it, guys. Do unto others, because what you do unto others, you just may be doing to God as well. So Plutarch tells us that Isis, in the minds of the Egyptians, was the female receptive part of nature. Osiris was the light, Typhon the darkness, the obscuration of the sun and the moon. You see that right there? Remember, 721 BC, something darkened the moon. Here it is right here. Typhon darkens both the sun and the moon. Osiris was the fruit-giving Nile water. Typhon was the salt and barren sea. Osiris was moisture. Typhon was drought, the parching wind, which overcomes and consumes moisture. Osiris was health. Typhon was disease. Typhus, anyone? It's very interesting. So, here we're going to get into the king list of Egypt. This researcher impressed me because he's telling you the truth. Government has lied about history. They have lied about education. They have lied about science. They have funded scientific organizations that in themselves are nothing but intelligence operations that are designed to lie to you about the world you live in. The government is responsible for all this. The government is 100% controlled ops. It doesn't matter if you're Republican. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat. It is still the same shit show. And anytime somebody thinks they get up and change, they call themselves a libertarian. Have we ever elected a libertarian into any? Oh no. Why? Because they're not a part of the program. The sky darkens, and something unusual happens that's only attached to the dark satellite. When the dark satellite appeared in 713 BC, it brought fundamental changes to our world. I have a video that goes into detail about this, and my published books go into a lot more detail. But in 713 BC, the ancient calendars that the whole world went by was a 360 turnings of the stars calendar. It was 360 days a year, but then something happened and the sun stopped moving across the sky. Then it went retrograde 10 degrees. Then it stopped in the sky again. Then it retraced the 10 degrees that it had lost and then continued on its journey. And on the other side of the world, they claimed they lost 20 hours of night. Or the night, it was nighttime for 20 hours. So 713 BC, all of a sudden the year changed because 5.24 days were added to every year, and it changed every calendar and timekeeping system in the world. After World War II, anthropologists visiting those islands found the most unusual stuff. They found mock runways. They found buildings that looked like U.S. military buildings made out of thrush and bamboo and seaweed and all these materials. And they found shamans who were doing things that looked like American navigators or pilots and men that were guiding aircraft, telling them where to park, where to taxi, when to take off, and waving the sticks back and forth. They had developed rituals and dances trying to get the parachutes and the boxes to fall from the sky every time they heard the roaring dragons going across the sky. That's when the most of the collective that were going to wake up began waking up. We're also confronted with Charles Fort's sense of humor. He documented many astronomical anomalies. Some of the data that you guys have seen from me about the variable star activity, when weird things happen in the sky, things fall from the sky, earthquakes, volcanoes, these are joined in the sky with unusual heightened variable star activity. All the red stars in the sky that change their magnitudes are called variable stars. That's why they're called variable stars. They go from first magnitude, second, third, fourth, whatever, until they can't be seen. But these stars act erratic, almost like they're singing, or they're tiny, 10,000 little tiny red projectors in the sky that create actual phenomena in our atmosphere that we experience. Charles Fort documented these and many others. Stars that changed their places, stars that moved, stars that vanished, stars that had unusual geometrical shapes, stars that seemed to come close to our world and then go right back to their original position, stars that changed their colors. He says, I do not know what the mind of an astronomer looks like, but I think of it as a fizzle with excuses revolving around it. I love that dude. He was very critical of the scientific community. No one knew anything about it, but it was rumored to have underground galleries and like a necropolis, a city underneath the Great Pyramid. This is the extent of Ammianus Marcellinus' knowledge as well. He knew there was an entrance, that it went down to a chamber, and that's it. That's it. Another 400 years would pass before the Caliph of Baghdad, however you say it, the Imam turned Caliph of Baghdad, his name was Al-Mamun. Al-Mamun and took his men and excavated. They tunneled into the Great Pyramid. While they were tunneling, hammers and chisels reverberated the structure in that area, and they heard a thump, boom. They went to the direction of that sound, and they found the descending passage. No time to read. Have you seen the video of the paraglider flying over Giza pyramid showing the writing on the top level? Thoughts? I'm glad you mentioned that because I have seen some really ignorant comments about that. Listen, guys, I'm gonna have to close this video pretty soon because I have a prior engagement, but I want to answer this question. All those inscriptions you see at the top of the Great Pyramid were done by people who climbed up to the Great Pyramid. On my channel, I have shown pictures that are in black and white from the 1920s and 30s and from the late 1800s of people on the top of the Great Pyramid who took a camera up there. Those inscriptions are in different languages. Some of them are Arabic, some of them are Greek, some of them are Latin, some of them are English. Maybe even Hebrew, I don't know. But there's different languages exhibited up there. These are people who climbed to the top and did that. And its ankle is chained because Apollyon is in the abyss chained. This is what the whole 7 seals are about. The breaking of the first seal was about Apollo Pharmakia attacking the human family as a sacrifice to Apollo. So this dark satellite is scheduled to return in 2052. I've showed the chronology in my published books. In 713 BC, it did what it did. It was seen as a dark black javelin in the sky in the year 76, and it literally started the Saka calendar. And then we have it's returning in 2052, which is 168 years after the Statue of Liberty was erected outside of New York and dedicated. Those 168 years are represented in the chronometry of the Statue of Liberty, which has a circular staircase that goes up 168 steps to the torch. The symbolism here is very reminiscent of the Great Pyramid, which is also a chronometrical calendar, which I've demonstrated. In the 168th year of the Statue of Liberty chronometrical prophecy, liberty will be taken from the earth. This is 2052. It is the return of the dark satellite. In the second Esdras prophecies, you wouldn't believe. I get lost in my own material sometimes. Let's see. Howard Carter's Atlantis ring. I never heard of that. Howard Carter in 1922 discovered King Tutankhamun's deal. And then like 12 or 11 people on that archaeological expedition actually fell to the curse of Tutankhamun. I mean, this is the tradition. I don't know if it's true or not, but a whole bunch of people died really back to back within 2 or 3 years after discovering that. Remember, in Archaix, this is all about biospheres collapsing and becoming new worlds. And the new world that we're waiting on now is a very ancient one. The Bible is very correct in a lot of its eschatology. The last days shall be as the days of Noah. Well, anybody who's followed my research knows in the days of Noah, we had a vapor canopy world. And this is the origin of Greek traditions, the civilization of the Titans. They were vapor canopy humans. When the vapor canopy collapsed, their sons and daughters were giants living in a whole new world. They weren't Titanic anymore, and they couldn't be because the conditions of the vapor canopy world were gone. But they did share some of their parents' genetics. But one generation after the giants, humans were normal size. So I hope that answers your question, Meryl, but can you expound upon the woman who led the goddess worshippers into battle after the collective discovered the simulations? That's really highly detail specific, but you're asking me a question based off a whole bunch of fragments of pieces of information that I've had to put together that might not necessarily be true. Yes, there was a goddess religion. Yes, matriarchal power was superior to the patriarchal powers until the patriarchy took over, and they still had to acknowledge the goddess. Yes, I'm a simulationist. Yes, the data sets for simulation theory are profound, especially what Archaix has brought to the table. Absolutely new historical data and calendrical data showing that we're in some type of mathematical construct, and that calendars are actually protocols for phenomena that happen cyclically. Absolutely. Putting all this together, yes, I did come up with a scenario. I did come up with that scenario. But you're never going to find an ancient text that actually unfolds and says all that. You're just not. The controllers looked down and said, behold, man is like one of us. By virtue of imagination, there is nothing he can accomplish. And what were they trying to accomplish? They were trying to escape the construct. They were trying to invade heaven. And the controllers looked down, the gods in Genesis looked down and decided that wasn't going to happen. We're going to be looking at all those major events in world history that happened before the Great Pyramid was constructed. And we're going to look at those, and we're going to look at the measurements inside the Great Pyramid and see, did the builders know something we didn't? Did they predict the future? Or was something else happening here? It's a mind bender tonight. But tonight, by the end of this video, you're going to have a much better grasp at just how anomalous and incredibly amazing the Great Pyramid is. But not only that, you're going to understand better the situation that you found yourself in, living in this world at this time right now. It's an amazing series of revelations. Nowhere in the coffin text, nowhere even in the pyramid text are there any references to any pharaohs building pyramids. The Giza pyramids, nothing. So Herodotus Herodotus was astonished about the Great Pyramids. He described them as white gleaming mountains because they were covered in white limestone at the time. He said there was a labyrinth underneath the Great Pyramid and that it was multiple levels and there was giant coffins down there. And much of that has been found since 1902, when the Egyptian Antiquities Department actually became an intelligence agency under Maspero. Since then, the entire affair has not been about excavation and dissemination of information. It's about excavation and keeping from the public what they're finding. So Herodotus, 24 centuries ago, is the origin of Cheops built the Great Pyramid. The Purge is designed to boost the economy. In the Purge movies, the elite carry out hits through murder squads during purges to remove political undesirables. This is like little psyops being run in the middle of the purge. So operations within operations. So the government-sponsored guillotines are made available and set up in different places for purgers to freely use. It's crazy. The murder squads operate using ordinary plumbing and painting type contractor vehicles that are local to the environment. So you wouldn't even suspect. See a plumber. I've seen a plumber for 20 years. It's right there on the corner, but it's not them. Back doors open up and a murder squad comes out, takes somebody, kidnaps them off the street, drives them to a guillotine that's in an intersection. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy, guys. This is the Purge movies. Purge is accompanied by a blackout. When the purge happens, there's a total blackout of power and communications. In the purge movies, we have this guy who stands on a corner steadily talking about how the gates of hell are open. It has nothing to do with the purge, but he's sitting there going, the gates of hell are now open. Foreigners come to America for more murder tours. Yeah. Didn't Biden start that? Didn't he invite all these people over the Texas border and all that? Yeah, they're here for murder tours. So in the movies, license plates read, "A Nation Reborn." You know how Texas license plates say the Lone Star State? And Florida, what's that, the Sunshine State? Ice Age theory, 59 different Ice Age theories because they can't get it right. Why? Because they refuse to come to the table and look how vapor canopy theory answers for all the anomalies. That's it. Vapor canopy theory is being ignored is the reason why there's 59 different Ice Age theories. Ice Age is bullshit. Uniformitarianism is bullshit. Yeah, natural selection, absolute bullshit. In Archaics, we show the presentations. Hundreds and hundreds of pictures showing all in entire ecosystems from the bottom of the ocean to the highest mountains of the habitable zone, the timberline, flash frozen, everything. And none of that makes sense because all those biological organisms are alive today. So if the entire world ceased to exist at one time and it was recent, and yet every life form that we find flash frozen by the Medusa effect into stone is alive today in our backyards, then there is an anomaly here that's unaccounted for. Uniformitarianism cannot be true. Something else must be happening. So we have to look to the historical record. But I got some reservations because of what people are claiming he's saying some of those early Greek texts say in Busenbark. So for it to be all of a sudden put out into the field now, I'm not saying he's lying. I'm not saying he's wrong. I have to know, what Greek translations of the New Testament are you referring to? Where did they come from? What is their provenance? This is what we do in Archaics. We have to find out all the facts first before we make any educated guesses and figure it out. So Ammon, Dr. Ammon is on the table. I'll check him out. He may be the truth. And if so, he'll be on my channel talking about it if he wants to. I don't know if what he's describing is the Great Flood of Noah. I have my doubts. I think it's something bigger. I think it's the Adam and Eve reset cataclysm, or the 5239 BC year one of the Anuna calendar that I've told you guys so much about and showed you in charts. I think it's bigger. So, which is commonly known as the deluge. Everyone has heard of the extraordinary object found in the last century on the banks of the Lena, North Siberia. The ice, in melting, exposed the body of a mastodon in such perfect preservation that dogs ate its flesh until Dr. Clark conveyed the skeleton to St. Petersburg, Russia, in the museum of which it now stands. Buffon mentioned 6 elephants preserved in the ice near the Ohio in America. I can't pronounce this. Serishu discovered another on the banks of Alatia, a large river which empties itself into the icy sea. In short, there is scarcely a canton in Siberia which does not contain the bones of elephants. The islands on the icy sea furnish enormous quantities, which is put forward as a proof that this drear region was at one period possessed of a genial climate. I've showed that in a video. Now, the reason I'm saying all these things is the disclosure of absolute truth is what Archaix is about. Yes, I've been telling you guys I'm going to piss people off. Yes, I've been telling you that I'm going to anger a lot of other people in the community. People have put out absolute disinformation, real shoddy research, total garbage material that they're promoting as fact. I call it out. And there's a whole lot more I could call out. I'm just not going to waste my energy. I can't attack the whole world, but damn near the majority of the material I find a lot of mistakes in it. I find things that are easily correctable. And the only time I'm really aggressive in my call outs is when the accurate information has been available for a while. Why? Because I freely give it to the public in data sets. So when that data is not dealt with and it is absorbed by some of these people I'm seeing put all this information out, I realize what's going on. There's no longer Jaason playing Mr. Nice Guy. There's no more me just trying to educate you. Now I'm calling you out for the shill you are. And I will continue that behavior because in 2024, it is too late to be polite. The world is now 227 years later. The world is teeming with people. Cities have been built. Infrastructure is laid. Some cities are already getting old. It's 227 years after the Great Flood. And the Great Flood still had millions of survivors. So we're dealing with a very populated world. And we know this because the wars that are described at this time period in the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, in the battles of the Kur, etc., what is described in the Sumerian text, in the Sargon epos, we have these massive battles that are also chronologically dated for this period in the book of Jasher. They're amazing, huge. There's so many people on the battlefield. So many people. The world is now packed and full of people and dynasties. And the history that I'm giving you now of Semiramis and Nama and Noah and Kim and Kronos, these are the survivors of whoever the elite were in the world before the flood. This is who they are. This is the story, the genealogy of the elite that survived that cataclysm. And this is how the story is unfolding. The adhesive that was used to fuse together 2.5 million blocks that are all 2.5 to 70 tons a piece, with the 70-ton monoliths toward the upper part of the infrastructure. We don't have the engineering capability to pull that off. It's not like stacking red bricks, guys. We're talking about laser tolerances had to be employed because when you're dealing with 203 levels, courses of blocks, every course must be perfect or the course above it won't set. It won't be right. And the courses above them. And by the time you get to the end of your pyramid, it's all crumbling at the top. It's not uniform. That's not what. Now, The second seal, as I have shown, when considering the original Greek and removing the Judeo-Christian filters that are designed to throw you off, this second seal specifically refers to a period when small arms violence and fires erupt everywhere. And the colors of the horsemen are connected to the national colors of Islam, starting with the second horseman. And it is my position that in this year, there will be small arms attacks against infrastructure, against businesses, and against residential areas by migrant terrorists already here and waiting for their cue. Remember, guys, this is a hot topic right now. All they ever hear is stuff about we're going to provide free energy through all this. We're going to use the water from the Nile going through subterranean aqueducts. We're going to create a vacuum compression, and it's going to come up from the bottom. It's going to fill, and our mechanism is going to go up and down rapidly in the chamber. We're going to build up all this pressure, and it's going to beautifully create. We're going to attach whatever we got to attach to it, and we're going to create free energy from water. The construct loves introducing new things. Inventions, it thrives on them. I've said this many times on my channel. So this right here was welcomed because every verbal piece of data the construct absorbed in figuring out what all these avatars were doing, working together, was that these divine instructions, these architectural instructions, were building a power plant, a water pump, building something that was mundane but curious, and it was built. But once it was built, there was an explosion in the king's chamber. It was enough power to literally upload all the arithmetic that was hidden in the structure. The measurements that were hidden in the structure that were all connected to the 138. And we know the 138 is connected to 2178. And I've showed on my channel that 2178 is the immortal number. It does not collapse. It is absolute mathematical proof that our arithmetic, which governs our reality, is actually moored to something else. And that upon scrutiny, our reality, our arithmetic collapses to zero in 95% of our analysis, except for when numbers permutate downward into a loop that never ends. And that loop is the number 2178 and its permutations. These were all in those divine instructions. And when they built that structure that encoded all that, they uploaded it when they activated that structure, and that compression was built in the king's chamber. So as a matter of perspective, here's 34 years after the flood. 34 years ago was a long time ago. Oh, the whole world could have been through a lot of things in 34 years. Think about everything we've been through since 1990. All the changes in culture, everything. I mean, even 9/11. 9/11, Afghan wars, the Sarajevo, the Bosnian wars, man, we've been through a lot since in the 90s, all the way up until today. Hell, look at this bumbling idiot we got for a president. He recorded that the Egyptian priest told him that their dynastic beginning went back 17,000 years. So, this is Herodotus. I have that book. I've showed it to you in my library. Herodotus of Halicarnassus wrote this book 2,400 years ago. I have an English translation. The Egyptians told him when he was in English that their historical records went back, not their astronomy and all that, their historical records went back 17,000 years. It's all a stage. Shakespeare was not wrong. This is a stage. We all play our parts. We all fall. We all trip. We all make mistakes. We all get back up and we pick ourselves up, and most people continue on without learning a single thing from those mistakes. But we are specifically programmed to fail. The synaptic fail safes in our intellectual programming, in our cultural programming, it's all there. We make our greatest achievements in life after we have performed an epic fail. Eudoxus studied in Egypt and lived during Plato's life. Therefore, he is the most credible when asserting that the Egyptians reckoned a year as a month. Yeah, you can't get around that. So, matter of fact, for anybody new watching this presentation, I'm sharing my screen right now, because you probably didn't see these, and I would hate to leave them out right now. I'm not going to spend much time on them. But you can't, there is no getting around these chronological facts at all. Right here. Ancient authorities on Plato's 9,000 years actually being 9,000 months. First of all, where Solon heard the story from was the priests of Neith. Look at that. Priests of Neith at Sais, who related the Atlantis story, they only employed a lunar calendar. Eudoxus of Cnidos is not the only scholar to correct Plato. Eudoxus of Cnidos, Lactantius, Plutarch, Macrobius, Eusebius, and many others all knew the ancient Egyptians reckoned a month as a year. All makes sense. He is explaining that this phenomenon at the equator depressurizes underground and forces the equatorial bulge to go down and cause, it's the only thing holding back the southern hemisphere oceans. He explains there is far more water in the southern hemisphere than in the northern hemisphere. There's less land, therefore there's way more water in the southern hemisphere. He says a depressurization event causes the equatorial bulge in a series of earthquakes to just go down. And as soon as it goes down, it creates a tsunami at the equator of pressure incoming from the southern hemisphere. Let me show you how this works. Archaeologists know that the Kish dynasty started in 2131 BC. But they know this by a totally different species of analysis. They're using archaeology and they're using all kinds of other things. They're not going by these impossible numbers of Billy Carson and everybody else. Zechariah Sitchin. They're not. Listen to this. 2,400 years plus 2,700 years plus 34,080 years of the 84 kings is exactly 39,180 shars. And when divided by 360, we arrive at 108.8 years. We know, and it's a matter that we are willing to debate anyone about, is credited in some traditions with building the Great Pyramid, but he never touched it. In fact, Enoch vanished. To me, Enoch is an avatar of the benefactor. And the reason I believe this is because the traditions show in the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees and the Talmudic text that Enoch received divine instructions from God. So we can say the Oversoul. The Oversoul provides Enoch divine instructions. Enoch takes these divine instructions to the Sethites in the ancient Egyptian text, Turin Papyrus and stuff. These were the children of Set, the builders of the Great Pyramid. Shamsu-Hor. The divine instructions concern an altar that's going to be put on the earth. It's a construction, but it's divine and it has a divine purpose. The divine purpose is attached to the very thing that happened to Enoch. Enoch disappeared from the earth and he was no more. He was gone. Exodus. This structure has everything to do with departing the construct. Enoch's role in the pre-cataclysm world was to pass off divine instructions onto the Sethite architects. But he didn't tell them what the structure does. They had an engineering interpretation, meaning it was a giant water pump. It pumped up water and did something with it. Maybe it turned it into hydrogen. It was pure hydrogen energy and it became a power source. And that's only on the surface. I've already revealed on my channel what the pyramid really did. And it's all in the secret is the fine structure constant. The secret is that the very programming that runs our whole entire construct is mathematically right there. And I've showed it. It's in the Great Pyramid. The 138 sequencing found everywhere. He passed off those divine instructions. Therefore, the builders had no idea what they were constructing outside what they were told, a power plant. They had no idea. And when you fully process that when you're walking your dog out in public and you're looking at the world around you, that something greater than you is experiencing those moments with you, there is nothing to fear. It's crazy. Every narrative in the world's attached to the eclipse. Technically, Monday is the third day of darkness. There's a lot of narratives attached to that. But it seems like the invasion of aliens is off the table right now. That's a red flag to me. Why? Why? So, warnings of possible increased CME activity. Ben Davidson of Suspicious Observers, he's telling you every single day of all the threats from the sun. Sun's ejecting all the coronal mass ejections. One's going this way, one's going that way. We're passing through. So reality tunnels. This is a really good question, but you asked about the collective as well, or you inferred something about the collective. So if you don't like the collective programming and you don't like your life as it is, then you need to knit for yourself your own reality tunnel. And you can do that. It's the co-creator relationship. But in the co-creator relationship, there's a dynamic involved that almost stops everyone from getting what they want. And that is the idea that they have to do all the work. That's not what a co-creator relationship is. You're a mental architect, and the blueprint is all in the field. And anything that you want, I've showed you guys hundreds of examples of me bringing into my life the very things I want. Yeah, I'm not perfect. I'm always going to make mistakes. Not perfect at all. I've made mistakes in the middle of videos, and you guys have corrected me. But that's what it's all about. Nobody wants to achieve perfection. There would be nothing else to live for. But to create your own reality tunnels requires you to take the initiative, to build the mental construct. What is it you want? Once the field understands exactly what you want, it automatically begins knitting for you circumstances. It brings things into context. It moves variables in the field that are far from you. You would have never put these together yourself. But that requires faith. It requires you to be the architect.